ladies and gentlemen. We are happy to host Xin Zhang, Dr. Xin Zhang. He's a researcher, senior researcher from Riksbank, and Dr. Zhang received his PhD from University of Amsterdam and Tinbergen Institute. His research areas include time series econometrics and also financial economics, credit and risk, and quantitative finance. Today, Dr. Zhang will speak on the topic closely linked to our recent research conference, and in particular the topic of his talk is spread the world international spillovers from central bank to communication. So you are welcome, Dr. Zhang, and the floor is yours. Yes, you can start.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to start by thanking the National Bank of Ukraine for inviting me here and for giving me the chance to present my joint work with co-authors from Riksbank, Hannah, Christoph, and Saya. So as you can tell from the title, we are interested in looking at international dimension of the central bank communication. Yeah. And as I heard, you just hosted a very active and interesting conference on central bank communication. So I assume many of you are already experts on this field. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion. If you have any questions, please let me know and just raise your hand, and I'll try to answer and try to clarify what we are trying to assess here. And as a usual disclaimer, this paper is only the personal views of the authors and doesn't reflect the official view of the Riksbank. So what we do in this paper is trying to answer this research question: does central bank communication generate international spillovers? So what we mean here with international spillovers is that whether central bank in one country, once they communicate, will this have any impact on communication strategies elsewhere in another country, and whether this the communication from the originating central bank can also have impact on foreign macroeconomic variables. This becomes very interesting given the large literature talking about conventional monetary policy and unconventional monetary policy generate spillovers in the international dimension. For instance, starting from Burma and Fletcher, and also many authors after them, this show that conventional monetary policy can generate international spillovers. For instance, Ray in his 2015 paper found out that spillovers from global financial cycle to emerging countries is affected by the monetary policy of the country in the center of the network, meaning, for instance, the Federal Reserve or the monetary policy of the ECB. And then, given after the financial crisis or after the Great Recession, we see a lot of countries are implementing the unconventional monetary policy. And there are also studies showing these international spillovers coming from unconventional monetary policy. For instance, Chen et al., so Chen and the co-authors, they find out that the unconventional monetary policy can, especially the more loose monetary policy in the developed countries, generate large capital inflow into emerging countries and also cause the exchange rate to appreciate. And later on, find by dailies when the developed countries reverse their monetary policy to more contractionary monetary policy, they see a reverse of this. And this can generate a lot of volatility in emerging countries and raise a lot of concerns for the emerging country central banks. This effect is not only on the capital and exchange rate. You can also find literature talking about unconventional monetary policy can influence asset prices or interest rate in foreign economy. And also, ever since 1990s, we see an increase in degree and scope of central bank communication. For example, Woodford found out central banks can actually use the communication as a strategy or as a tool to implement their monetary policy, and blinder and co-authors also find that the central bank communication is becoming very important in the economy. Then there are a few research shows that central bank communication predicts policy changes and also affects domestic market variables. For instance, Hansen and macroeconomic, which is a recent paper published in Journal of International Economics, where they find out the forward guidance component and also the assessment of the economy reflected in the communication or in the press release of the central bank can have an impact on the domestic market variables and also in the market rates, for instance. And Apple and Green they are using a different approach. They are using a dictionary-based method. You find out if you look at central bank communication, you can actually use the text information to predict the policy decision later on. Then there's also, of course, a large literature talking about how central bank communication can predict exchange rate movements. So what we are trying to do here is to go beyond what is already done in literature. And we are starting to not only look at the domestic impact of central bank communication, but also we want to look at how this effect can go beyond the border. In a way, they were trying to think and try to assess whether we can understand the movement of central bank communication sentiment and whether this can be explained by economic factors or there's something else. And in a way, we're trying to address whether sentiment of central bank communication can generate spillovers, and whether this can have any real economic impact. So what we find in this paper is that we do find movements in central bank communications in the large number of countries we look at. And this movements is not reducible to real indicators. For instance, if you think about, well, the two countries are very important trade partners to each other. Maybe their central banks are more likely to talk to each other. Thus, we see a large movements in their communication strategy or in their sentiment or optimism in their talks. And you may also think maybe financial flows, like the stronger capital flows between countries, can generate movements or a lot of similarity in their communication. We find these two are important channels to create the movements of central bank communication, but cannot explain fully the movements of central banks. We later show that there are some other factors, economic and non-economic factors, which turns out to be important determinants in generating these movements. We also find out sentiment shocks, which meaning sentiment here means when the central bank talks to the public, whether it's positive or negative, or you can think about as the optimism or pessimism in their talks. And this we define as a sentiment. And the sentiment shock, meaning the quarterly difference of how optimistic the central bank is when they talk. So the sentiment shocks actually can generate cross-country spillovers in sentiment, like I said in the beginning. So, for example, if the Fed become more optimistic, does the ECB become also more optimistic in the next in their talks? And we also find these spillovers can have real impact in the policy rate, not only domestically but also for foreign countries. And this can indirectly or directly have impact on the macroeconomic variables in foreign economy. So we extend the existing evidence of domestic impact of communication to international dimension. We also look at a few important central banks in greater details. We find that there's a very interesting patterns if you look at major central banks. The Fed is a very special central bank because it's the largest economy and it's the main driver of economic growth for past years. So they do play a very important, uniquely influential role in generating this sentiment spillovers in the central bank world. But if you look at some other central banks, which is considerably large and important, for instance, ECB and the Bank of Japan, the result is not so clear what kind of role they play. in global central bank world. And in the end, as I said in the beginning, the movements cannot be explained by the link of trade or financial flows, but we do find the geographic distance as a very important economically significant determinant in the sentiment movements between the central banks. Meaning if the two central banks or two countries are next to each other, then more likely their communication sentiments are similar if we look at the history. So I'm going to show you the robustness checks and also regressions, but this is the results we find. So as an overview of the data and also trying to introduce you to how we did this analysis, we actually compiled a new data set of central bank speeches for 23 countries. What we do is we scrape the website from the BIS, where they have an archive of central bank speeches given by different central banks and also translated in English. So it's a very nice and comprehensive data set containing many, many countries. In the end, we didn't use the full data set because not all countries communicate as often. So we narrowed down to 23 countries which deliver enough speeches every year in our sample. We also connect metadata from site and documents. So from these speeches, we were able to get institution names, whether it's Fed or ECB or National Bank of Ukraine. And also we get the speaker title and who and the name of the speaker. We also can look at the speech title and date. Then we process all the text to compute the sentiment score. So the sentiment score is essentially captured how optimistic or how pessimistic the individual speech is. To give a and this method is based on Lofron and McDonald paper in Journal of Finance 2011. So it's a well-published and well-cited paper used by many researchers in finance and macro, which is essentially they give out a list of words where they classify as negative or positive. For instance, bad, that will ends up as a negative, or it's like growing or growth, then it's more likely to be positive side. And this dictionary, of course, is a little bit restrictive because the original paper is done for the 10K financial statement. So it's mostly for the firms when they give out financial statements and publish in SEC website in the US. But we use it for central bank communications here to look at the document generated by central bank. We'll later show, even though the dictionary is not designed for central bank, you can still use the sentiment score generated from this dictionary because it provides a large list of words you can use to count and compute the sentiment score. Of course, there are some processing before you actually use the dictionary. For example, you take out the stop words and, for example, and or to, and also you take out some special characters. Then you in the end up with a list of words. So how do we compute or generate a score or a number to measure sentiment? Here I give you an example. This is a speech given by Brainard from Federal Reserve Board in 2019 March. The speech is about navigating cautiously. So here is just one paragraph we take from the text. You see the red is the downward. So this it belongs to the list of negative words. So we count it as negative words 1. And then in the same text, you see something like gains. So it's in green, and then you can consider in counting this one word which is positive from this paragraph. So essentially, you can try to count how many positive or negative words in each paragraph of the speech. But then, given it's a small number of words you use in paragraph, so it's not reliable. So what you should do is to look at the whole speech and then accumulate the counts of positive and negative words. Then you compute the sentiment like this. So P means the positivity. So that's the ratio of the number of positive words as a ratio of total words in your documents after cleaning and pre-processing all the text. The negative, the n, is the number of negative words as a fraction of total words. Then we take the net between the negative fraction, a positive fraction to the negative fraction as a measurement of sentiment. So what it means if the net measurement is higher means there are more positive words in the whole speech, so it's more positive in the sentiment. And then if the net sentiment goes down, that means it's become more negative. So the level of this net doesn't matter too much, but rather the difference from the speech to speech or from the month to month average give you the sort of change of sentiment in different central banks. So, and also we can compute this sentiment score for each of the speech given by different speakers, and we gather them together at a quarterly frequency, and then we ignore the different names of the speakers, but we somehow compute the quarterly average to sort of capture the overall sentiment of the central bank. So we take, for instance, every quarter the speeches given by officials from the Federal Reserve, and we take the average or the median of the sentiment score computed for each speeches and use that as a measure of sentiment. And of course, there are other ways to do it. You can only look at, for instance, the negative fraction. You don't do the difference. That's all fine, and our results are robust to that. So the reason we focus on the quarterly measures instead of what is popular, for instance, if you, I guess some people presented the work in the workshop where you look at the narrow window around the press conference to basically 30 minutes window to capture the high frequency movements of the market as reaction to the press release of central bank. We're not doing this because, one, we want to include as many countries as we can. So for developed countries, it's a bit easier to get this high frequency movements from markets. But once you are going beyond the developed countries, then it becomes difficult to compute the high frequency market movements to the central bank communication. And secondly, we want to focus on lower frequency component of sentiment. So that's like gradual change of the central bank view of the economy or sentiment. Why is this important? Because there's a recent paper by Jeremy Stan and Adi from Harvard. They show that the central banks, if they have private information, they would like to release this information to market gradually, because the central bank, they don't like volatilities in the bond market. If they have some private information and they just release it all at once, then means the market will be very volatile, and this is not something the central bank likes. So what they will do is to, over a period of time, gradually release this information to the market, so it doesn't spook the market. Of course, the market participants, if they do the Fed watch or central bank watch, they would understand it. So this will have an adverse consequence because they understand there's a feedback because of this policy. But we're not going to look at this spillover, also this reverse effect from market to the central bank. Rather, we're thinking about, we are trying to also capture a similar process where the central bank, they want to gradually release information to the market. So that's why we're looking at these quarterly frequency measures instead of 30 minutes before and after press release. So here's the plot of what we find. This is the net sentiment score, as I explained in the previous slides. And we plotted over the sample period from 2002 to end of 2018, I think. And the dots capture the individual score from each speech. So we take the average of the speeches in each quarter, and then we do a rolling mean because it can be really volatile if we just plot the quarterly frequency here. So we do a rolling mean of the speeches for the Federal Reserve. And you see a very interesting pattern that there's actually an uptick of the sentiment, meaning the Fed become a little bit more optimistic right before the financial crisis. So it's kind of surprising and also interesting that the central banks sort of have this positive trend before the financial crisis, but then the whole sentiment started to drop quickly, and then of course reached the bottom around the financial crisis. But this pattern reversed quickly after 2012, and in 2013 it's almost as the same as the pre-crisis level. So meaning the economy might have a good recovery, and the Fed Reserve is now becoming as positive as before the crisis. Yes.
Does it mean that on average over this period it was more communication was more pessimistic, so it's less than 1 on average?
Yeah, so as I said, the level itself doesn't really tell you much. So of course, I think this is like standardized. So what we do is we take the first speech, we compute that one as the standard, is the 1. Then we do fraction as is. But so what we should read is really the pattern, not the actual number. So it's like how it goes up and down, and this gives you a sense of how central bank sentiment is moving over the period. Yes. Please.
I have 2 questions. So the first one is, did you do any manual checks of this metrics? So for example, you said the word growing, whether it's a growing economy, it's good, but it's like a growing debt burden, it can be bad. And the second one, do you see any selection of speakers in like bad times? They try to release press releases from more optimistic people or something like that. So that would mean that you would probably find like a coefficient bias downwards, so like help the results. Did you try that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So firstly, we did a few manual checks, but we didn't do it for whole sample. But then for the Norfolk and McDonald, they did in the paper, they do manual checks for the dictionary. So try to make sure it assess the sentiment of the speech or the 10K report. But in this case, it's we didn't do it for all the reports, but you can kind of see it from the number we get. It kind of makes sense. But we also did a few other checks later on to see whether it makes sense, but then you can tell me whether you are convinced about that. But another thing is we are saying, again, if there's any systematic bias, we're not interested in level. We're really interested in the relative sense. As far as we don't have any dynamics over time, give you more or less bias, it's going to be probably fine. And second question is whether as a whole institution, we ask more like positive speakers to speak in bad times. This could be the case, but on the other hand, we are looking at the large number of central banks. I don't know if that's the case for every central bank, but we do look at later on whether individual speakers, if they become more or less important, and whether this gives you a different sentiment score over time. But we didn't find it, so I'm not sure that's the case. Yeah, and also probably this can. Yeah, I guess this will just somehow bias our result downwards. We wouldn't find much probably, so it wouldn't be a concern for later on study. But another way to convince you is to, well, we didn't do manual check for each report or each speech, but if you can look at ECB results, then you see a different pattern from Fed. So one observation is like the ECB is giving a lot of speech, really a lot of speeches, because they have also many speakers. And but then the interesting thing is the pattern of the sentiment score over time. So it doesn't pick up quickly after the crisis in 2008 and 2009, and then it continued to be lower than the before crisis level, sort of capture the sort of problematic situation in Europe after the big Great Recession, when the sovereign crisis became more in concern. So this is sort of another way we it's comforting to see like this pattern can somehow extend with the new economic activities. So Then we look at some robustness checks. Like we said, maybe some people are more pessimistic and optimistic than the others. So what makes a difference if you take, for example, only the chair, because the chairperson might carry the most important role in the institution. So if financial market reacts at all, then you should be looking at the chair only. And then that's what we do. So yeah, it's a bit small, but I hope you can see it. So we got one criticism from referee saying maybe you should look at the media instead of me, because he or she is concerned the central bank sentiment is somehow biased by individual outliers. So we find out it's not the case, the correlation is really high. So it's not the mean or the median doesn't make a difference. And then there's one which we only look at the chairperson speech, compute the average of the chairperson speech in the quarter and plot it here. So overall, the pattern is really similar. The only thing is because it is a little bit more noisy than the mean or median speech. That's understandable because they give relatively smaller number of speeches compared to all the speeches given by the institution. Another one is some people may prefer the sentiment score computed from the statement of monetary policy decisions or the press release, the research on the press release. You look at the announcement of central bank after the policy meetings when they actually make a decision. And we find out the correlation again is very strong with the speeches. So our speeches sentiment do capture the sentiment score as the other documents or different ways to compute the sentiment. So it is relevant and also it's meaningful regarding the sentiment in the different institutions. Another thing we did check is the word cloud to see whether the speeches does give you similar result as if you're using the announcements from the central bank. So what we do is we compute the word cloud from the speeches on the left and the announcement, so the press release from the Fed, and we look at the keywords there. So most of the times the speeches is still talking about relevant policies like interest rate, inflation expectations, or labor market, and this similar set of words can be found also in the word cloud of announcements. So you can imagine if we do topic models, which you kind of capture the topics carried in the speeches and in the announcements, these two should be similar in a way. So we are not missing out too much by only looking at central bank speeches, but not the announcements. But of course, we are happy to extend it to include like announcements, but I don't think we'll dramatically change the scope of compute. Then we did one simple checks because the first question I raised in the beginning is to think about the correlation or co-movements of sentiment, whether that one can be simply explained by the real economic linkages, right? You can think about maybe the two economies are tightly related to each other in terms of trade or financial flows. Then it's more likely they have very strong, close co-movements in their sentiment score of the central bank. But we did something a little bit different from there, but we show that the correlation of the real GDP growth and the correlation of central bank speeches sentiment. So one interesting thing is here, if you look at the real economic real GDP growth, UK has the strongest correlation with the Eurozone. But if you look at the central bank speech sentiment, the UK has the strongest correlation with the US. So from here, at least, we show that there's a difference in the correlation between the countries in terms of GDP growth and the sentiment from the central bank. And the similar thing is you can look at other countries, and this sort of like these two correlation metrics doesn't map to each other directly. Of course, there are still similarities, right? Because we just said there's a difference, but there's also similarity in terms of their sentiment scores. So this can be considered as like global cycle a global sentiment cycle in the central bank world, right? So the US and Eurozone and Sweden here are plotted, and you see this cycle before and after crisis. And interesting here is like I think Sweden sort of have a more volatile in terms of sentiment score compared to the US and Eurozone plotted here. We just showed you like how we compute the sentiment score, and we are trying to say something about the similarity and difference in terms of the comparison to correlations between real economic linkage, like the correlation table I showed. But is there any way we can probably look at networks, right? Because it's a very interconnected world with trade, financial flows, or central bank, they meet each other and talk. So maybe we can look at the network from the real economic side, and also network from the central bank sentiment side. So we construct the directed networks from trade, financial flows, and sentiment. And all these are computed bilaterally. But for trade and financial flows, it's not so easy to identify the directions, because almost all countries are linked to each other one way or another, but it's difficult to see which direction you go. So what we do for the trade and financial flows is to list the top 5 countries in terms of importance. For instance, I'll show later, give you an example. Yeah, here, let me just directly go here. So the importance of relationship like this. Germany is the top 5 trade partner of Luxembourg, but Luxembourg is not the top 5 trade partners with Germany. So that means in the network we plot, there will be arrow from Germany to Luxembourg, but not from Luxembourg to Germany. This is the way we generate the directions between countries in our network. And the network should capture this concept exposures. So each connected countries at least have, with at least one top trading or financial partnerships will have this exposure. And then the direction of the arrow always goes to the exposed country. For instance, here is the Luxembourg, the arrow from Germany to Luxembourg. Then we also have to compute to try to identify the direct networks from the sentiment. We do this by this gradual causality network introduced by Bidio and Law and co-authors in Journal of Financial Economics. What they do here is to build a whole network based on the bivariate gradual causality test. So it's sort of an easy way to think about this, like need-net relationships between different variables. And then they do a word test on the coefficient. I'm going to show the equations and to explain how we did this. So the trade data is from this World Integrated Trade Solution database. We have bilateral trade flows. We also see in terms of importance for the import and export partners. And for financial flows, we use the BIS local banking service database. And then, so using the same identification in terms of importance, we generate the direction. So getting back to the sentiment network. So what we do is we perform sentiment VARs for each country pairs. So it's always done with a pair of countries. For example, UK and the US, we do a bilateral VARs for these 2 countries. We identify the edges using the gradual causality test, and we use arrows to indicate direction of this causality. So we do like 2 directions, from country I to country J, and country J to country I. And this is the equation for this test, of this test we ran. It's coming from Bidio and the co-authors paper to 2012. So the country I, sentiment here, the net sentiment, is a regress on the lag of the sentiment from this country I, and also the sentiment from another country, country J. So you can imagine I to be the US and J to be UK. So then you test whether this Bij test, whether it's significant different from 0, then you can sort of draw a conclusion regarding the direction of the effect. But this grand causality network or this grand causality test is mostly a test for lead-net relationships. It's only suggestive. It cannot really be used as a true causality here. But we just want to project a direction in terms of the sentiment change. How does one country influence the other? And then the second equation is we do reverse. We do the UK sentiment on itself, and then we do it, regress it on the sentiment from US, and then we test the BGI as to see if we should draw an arrow from the US to UK. So the grandeur causality will tell you that the country J, in this case UK, will grandeur cause country, this should be I. This should be country I to the US when the BIJ is not zero, so it's a wall test in this. We are doing a little bit different version from the equations in Pino's paper because we are considering there could be potential non-stationarity in the sentiment and also in the sentiment part. So we do first we do an integration test for each of the country to see whether there's persistency in the network in the net sentiment score for each country. Then we determine the largest number of integration. Then we cover the max. So we put in the m nets up the nets here for the country I, and his case country J. Then we cover the maximum net relationship for P, which is based on the ARC criteria. Then we take the specification determinant of 2 and add nets of each variable to this equation. Then we do a wall test on the first P coefficient for foreign entries in each equation. So basically, we're testing here Bij always the P coefficient together. So in this way, we can control for the non-stationarity for the sentiment score, and also we can capture the possible non-period lead-net relationships between the countries. But the test itself is based on the wall test of Bij and BGI, and we plot the grand causality links in our network. And also we have to somehow define the arrows or the direction of the link. So each country pair will have at least one gradual causality link in other direction if connected by an H. Otherwise, we don't draw the line between the two countries. And also, if the gradual causality runs from country J to country I, the arrow on the H connecting J to I will point to I. But this doesn't rule out the possibility the country I will also have the effect on country J. So now is my test for your eyesights, if you can read from this plot. See if you have a very good eyesight like I have. So no, this is only suggestive because so the key takeaway from this one, which is direct network for trade exposures, meaning we plot the most important import-export patterns for each countries. And then this is very complicated the system where almost everyone linked to everyone. Not exactly between closer. But then we also have a direct network for financial flows for the countries in our sample. And also we have a grand causality test based on network for sentiment, as I explained in the previous slides. So the key takeaway is these three looks very different. It doesn't matter which country you look at, and it's very difficult to tell from a distance. But I'm going to zoom in to particular interesting countries to tell what is sort of interesting takeaway from comparison of the real economic networks and the sentiment-based networks. For instance, here we show the sub-network for United States. On that, we show the trade network for the US. What we can see is the US generates exports to many countries. And also they are, this should be important trade partners for different countries. And also there are import-export relationships between the countries. But mostly the errors outgoing for the US in terms of this network is connected to many countries. And it's the same for the sentiment network, but only with a fewer number of countries. Another observation is here in the right-hand side, where we plot the sub-network for the sentiment branch totality. You see the US is linked to mostly large central banks, for instance, the Eurozone and also Bank of Japan in the sentiment. So US is more a net generating sentiment in this network of sentiment for central banks. So it's very different from, it's kind of similar to their trade networks. So it shows like the US is playing a unique role in the global economy. And then if you look at other central banks, which are also important in the trade network, it's very different. For instance, Bank of Japan. So Japan is a very important trading country in the trade networks, has strong ties to China, Mexico, US, Canada, Indonesia, and Korea and Australia. But if you look at the right-hand side, the sentiment network is very different. Because on the left-hand side, Japan is more like generating shocks to other countries. But for sentiment score network, Bank of Japan is more absorber of shocks. So it absorbs the sentiment shock from other countries to their communication. So this is very different compared to the plot I just showed with the US. And then again, we look at Eurozone, it's giving you a similar message, because one might think the ECB is also a very important central bank in the world, so maybe should play as important role as the Fed in generating the sentiment in the central bank world. But it's not the case. So the trade, yes, Eurozone is important in giving the areas most outward going, but for the sentiment network, it's again absorbers of many countries. So one feature here we have to explain is we treat the members country in the Eurozone as a separate central bank because they also give speech. But here we are also computing sentiment score for the individual country. So this may explain why the Eurozone turns out to be absorber of information from member central banks, for example, the Bundesbank and the Bank of France. So because the Eurozone can act as an information absorber or aggregator of the Eurozone countries, so maybe that's the reason why it shows up as mostly absorber of sentiment shocks from other countries rather than the generator of shock. And we did the same for UK and Sweden. So essentially, it's an eyeball test to show whether the sentiment from the central bank communication network is similar to the real economic networks. In the plot, we show there's a drastic difference if you look at different countries. So, but this is not really direct, strong test for difference, right? In the next empirical section, we're moving into a little bit more rigorous test, rather eyeball test the difference of network. We're going to show with sign-restricted VARs whether there is any spillovers from the sentiment shock from one country to foreign central bank, and whether this shock to sentiment will have an impact on foreign macroeconomic variables. For instance, when the Fed talks more positively or negatively, how does this influence the macroeconomic variables in UK or in the Eurozone? So in this section onwards, we're going to we're not going to treat the member state central bank in the Eurozone separately. We're only going to look at the Eurozone as a whole. So we do this sign-restricted VARs with the method proposed by Rubio Ramirez in the 2020 paper, which he introduced a partial identification of sentiment shocks based on the impulse response functions. We do the sign-restricted VARs in two subsections. Firstly, we establish the central bank communication sentiment has a domestic impact. So we will show that the domestic sentiment have predict power for the policy decisions and also for the domestic variables, sort of confirming what is found in the literature by using mostly US and UK data. We're going to do it for more countries. So that's going to be a domestic VAR. And the second step, we're going to run the 2-country VARs. So there of course, the ordering of the variable become important because we want to look at the country pairs, but we want to look at spillovers in both directions. For example, we want to look at how the US shock affects Eurozone shock, and how does then later on we want to see how the Eurozone shock affect US variables. Then we are only going to make assumptions about domestic impact of sentiment. Why? Because our focus is on the international dimension. And we learn from the past published publications about the domestic impact of the sentiment from the central bank communications. So we can use the results in the past literature to make assumptions there, but we don't want to restrict ourselves in identifying the foreign spillover effects. So we are not making assumptions about foreign impact. We try to make the weakest possible assumption in sign and durations. And we also try different specifications, and the results tend to be very robust. So how do we impose the sign restriction here? So we assume that the positive structural shock to the central bank sentiment will generate non-negative sentiment for next quarter. So all these VR are based on quarterly frequency. And then has a non-negative impact on the policy rate, meaning when the central bank becomes more positive, it's more likely they're going to hike the interest rate and become more hawkish. And this will have a non-positive impact on unemployment rate. So you can think about this as a projection of positive assessment of underlying economy. So the unemployment rate is going to fall. But of course, you might think there's an indirect impact for increase of policy rate in the next few quarters. But this is indirect, so we are assuming mostly direct effect. So this effect is mostly non-positive. That's how we think about it. And then, given the positive structural shock to sentiment of the central bank, we also assume the equity price growth to be non-negative, and also real exchange rate to be non-negative, and the imports will also be non-negative. And all these variables are in quarterly frequency. Yeah.
So what does it mean real exchange rate goes up? Means appreciation or depreciation?
Means appreciation. And also this is a sort of real exchange rate against the basket of currencies. Sorry? Real effect, yeah. Do you have anything in mind?
No, I was just thinking, if you just have like a demand shock, will it look exactly like that? Or different? So how do I know this is not a demand shock that has the same impacts on all the variables?
Yeah, so we can't control that. So here we are. Yeah, so you have a fair point. But so this is the assumption we sort of make, and then sort of try to look at literature and see what we can find. And that's sort of we feel comfortable in the framework we're thinking about. When central bank go out and release information of their public assessment of the economy. So this is sort of the set of restrictions we are thinking about. But we cannot, of course, rule out the other explanations you have in mind. So, but we are sort of saying, if you believe in this set of restrictions, you can sort of find out impact in a certain direction, which sort of generate these spillovers. But there could be other explanations, and we're happy to test it. But I guess it's the job of the referees who will tell us later on what we should, what kind of test we should run in alternative. So we do the 6 variable VRs for each countries. This is summarized what we find. So this number here, which give you the highest impact, which quarter it arrives. And the sign here give you a direction, which way it goes. This only try to confirm the sentiment score is capturing something meaningful. It's not something weird. We computed. It's not noise we generated from speeches. So most of the results make sense. So there's some consistency in the sentiment of the central bank sentiment in their communication, and it has a predict power for the policy rate decisions in all countries we look at. And then also the impact on unemployment comes with a lag, and highest impact is in 4 quarters. Then there are some impact on the equity and exchange rate imports. But yeah. So I think the most takeaway the takeaway we have here is like there's some predict power for policy rate. So this means the sentiment score we generate carries some information about assessment of the underlying economy. So, yeah. So have an impact or have predict power for the policy rate. Now this is the key part we want to show regarding international spillovers. So we have we have a 6 variable VARs. So we drop this actual price, exchange rate, and cost. It was 6 variable VARs. So if we start increasing more variables, then we are losing power. So we don't want to do it. So we only in the end narrow down to 3 variables each countries, and then we have a 6 variable VARs. So we have the sentiment, pulse rate, and unemployment rate in the domestic countries, and also the foreign countries. But we impose only design restrictions for domestic part. Again, coming from literature. So the domestic sentiment has a non-negative effect on itself, has a non-negative effect on pulse rate, and has a non-positive impact on unemployment rate. And there's no restriction on common variables. So what do we find? So here we plot the impulse responses of the UK sentiment to the shock, to the UK sentiment from UK and the Euro area. So left columns plot the reaction from Euro area, and right panels give you the impact to the UK domestic variables. We plot 68% confidence interval for each of the impulse responses. One thing you can see is that ECB sentiment reacts to the UK sentiment with a positive correlation. And then the pulse rate also has a positive reaction to the positive shock to UK sentiment. And also there's impact on the unemployment rate, always a lag. And highest impact is around 7 quarters. So the UK sentiment has a strong impact on itself, has impact on policy rate, and also has direct, like immediate link to the unemployment in the UK. So we did the same for the opposite direction. It's interesting that we plot the impulse responses for UK and the Eurozone sentiment, policy rate, and unemployment as a response to the positive shock to Eurozone sentiment. So we see that the Eurozone sentiment has some certain consistency, so has a positive impact on itself, but doesn't have any impact on the UK sentiment at all. So it sort of confirms our reduced form network dipole testing. Like the Eurozone is mostly inflation absorber rather than a generator of sentiment in the global sentiment network. But then you see the policy rate of Eurozone and the unemployment rate of Eurozone reacts to itself, but doesn't have any impact on the UK. You can also see the same impact to the US sentiment shocks in pairwise VAR between the US and Eurozone, Eurozone and US, US UK, and UK and US. So this table summarizes you find with all the 20 bivariate VARs we read. So each of the panel corresponds to the VARs, which is sort of interesting. So for the first panel is the bivariate VAR summarized for the European, the Eurozone sentiment shocks. Now look at the impact of sentiment, policy rate, and employment for US, UK, Japan, and Sweden. So here it confirms what we find in the network. The Eurozone is not really generating strong international spillovers to other countries, but Sweden is somehow impacted. It has an impact on Sweden, on sentiment, the policy, and employment. And the US, on the other hand, has strong impacts in Eurozone, UK, and Sweden. So for Japan, somehow it doesn't have any strong impact. Japan, again, doesn't have some impact on policy rate, but doesn't have a very strong impact compared to the US. And the UK also doesn't play such an important role compared to the US. So in a way, it confirms what we find with our network study, but with a more structural way of VRs. Then you might wonder what is really driving the movements of the spillovers of sentiment from one country to the other. So what we do is we run a regression of correlations between the sentiment score of different countries over the whole sample period from 2001 to 2018. And we estimate the determinants of the cross-country sentiment movements, and also consider not only the real economic linkages as we presented, but also non-economic determinants. So we run a long-run sentiment movement equation of this. So it's a cross-sectional regression. So this rho ij is the cross-sectional correlation between the cross-country in the central bank sentiment. We have 23 countries which give enough speeches and also give us the access to data to, for example, the shared language or the economic variables like GDP growth, inflation, and other things. So we narrow down 23 countries in pairs. And we include a bunch of variables, including economic linkages, for instance, the real GDP correlation, the inflation correlation, the trade flow, the actual trade flows. So we used to do the dummy, but now we're using the actual flows between the countries, and also the private financial flows. So these are like, you compute like a fractional in terms of total exposure to other countries. Then we put it in the regression in the xij. We also include non-economic linkages, for instance, the distance between the central bank pairs. We use like the direct geographic distance between the capital cities, between the countries. For example, the DC and London as the distance between the Bank of England and the Fed. And then we including a dummy for shared language, like UK and US, the shared language, the dummy will be 1, will be 0 if you have other country pairs. And then we also have a dummy for colonial relationships. So if one country used to be colony of one country, or gain independence from that country, then this dummy will be 1 for this country pair. We also include the controls, like I said, this the economic linkages we showed. And then we also include the country fixed back, and also we include the dummy for shared continental. For example, if the countries are the same continent, we design the dummies. This is the table summarizing what we found. There are many numbers here, and also many really determinants we're trying to test. We include each of the determinants one by one, and then we include fixed that, keep that in all. One thing is like you see the adjusted R-square increase with the number of explanatory variable include, and also increase with the fixed effect. We have where then the stars here shows the significance. So the first observation we have is the language turns out to be sort of important in the first 3 columns. For instance, if 2 countries share the same language, then it means the coefficient 4.073 are significant, which translates into economic terms is like 24% of increase of the correlations, median pair correlation, if the two countries share the same language. So this relationship becomes insignificant once we increase the number of equality variables and then include fixed value. Another important determinant is the economic price, which can translate into like 40% increase if we have economic price. But the strongest impact we have here is the persistent and also always different result with the distance. So here, no matter which variables include the regression, and also with the inclusion of fixed value, and also we try to draw major countries like US or China, and the distance is always a significant result apart. So what it means is, for instance, 8,000 increase of the distance of two capital cities, which is roughly the distance between London and Beijing, then the average, and then would somehow decrease of this distance will increase the correlation of the sentiment of two central banks by around 40%, which is very high and also a significant result over the whole sample we run, and also over different specifications we have. So this can have some implications for the central bank communication, because you can think about two central banks who have a strong movement in the sentiment. If they have a strong economic increase, right? If you trade with each other, or have really large financial exposure to each other. But if there are some non-economic reasons they are listening to each other, for instance, they are more geographically close, then you meet each other more often, this can lead to suboptimal communication strategies. But there are also different channels why this is the case. For instance, in the International Business Cycle study, they show that there are also regional common factors which drive the correlation of the country development. So that can also be the explanations why we find this result. But for this paper, I'm not really studying the optimality regarding the sentiment or regarding the communication strategies, but it does open up the research agenda going forward. What is the sort of optimal communication strategy if you look at international dimension? How do you incorporate information from other countries? How do you look at economic linkages? Whether you should be aware of any potential behavior bias just because we talk to each other quite often given the geographic distance. So as a summary, we conclude that we find out the movement in central bank sentiment is not reducible to movements in real economic variables like trade, financial flows, or output. And we find out large central banks are not necessarily the most influential ones. The fact is, of course, very influential given the importance of the economy and also US dollar as the reserve, very important reserve currency of many countries. And but in the case of ECB and the Bank of Japan, they seem to be mostly absorbers of the shock rather than generator for sentiment shocks. And we find out that sentiment shocks can generate spillovers to sentiment in other countries, to interest rate and other market variables, not only domestically but also internationally. And in regression, we find out some non-economic variables like geographic distance can have a strong determinant of sentiment movements. So this can draw some attention to awareness of national behavior bias of communication for central bank. So yeah, so this concludes my talk. So I'm happy to answer questions if you have any.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting. Are these results, so what you basically do, you try to understand how communication, shocks to communication, shocks to sentiments affect macro variables of other countries. And is it consistent with results of conventional monetary policy? If, for example, Fed increases or decreases interest rate, and it has some effect on Europe, for example, and vice versa. If Europe does something with interest rate, it doesn't have such high impact on the United States, you know.
It's a it's a fair point. And this also is one of the biggest challenges we are facing with this paper. Because, I mean, when we write this paper, the idea is to introduce this new data set of central bank communication in speeches and establish the relevance. And this is the question we have to find interesting given the international rich dimension we have. So, but we also try to understand what is the channels, given we find out this spillover effects. There can be several channels we can think of. One is the, given there's a literature on domestic effect coming from sentiment shock of central bank. So we can think about, like foreign central bank listen to other central banks, and this can lead to their sentiment to change. And this may have impact on their policy decision later on, and have impact on market variables. Another way to think about this is, for example, some central banks may have a stronger, a better role, or better, the leading role in understanding and integrating the global business cycle signals. For instance, maybe Fed, they have the capacity, and also they are seeking the richest information relevant to understand the global business cycle. They are sort of the first to discover this, and then they sort of generate the shock to other countries or try to give out this information. And another thing is perhaps it could be other channels we don't control well with the VR. So that's possible. But we try our best to control different channels, and then the result still is sort of consistent. But it will be interesting if we dig deeper in the textual analysis, try to see if we're able to find different channels which can be used to understand why we find these international spillovers. And also, I'm happy to listen to your suggestions if you have any channels in mind. But the people we have already put in the policy rate in the regression, so it's not directly from the global coordination of monetary policy.
Maybe several more points. So when you did this sentiment analysis, you used pretty much all the communication that you've had, or you use some particular. What I mean, for example, so when central bank communicates something, it can communicate, for example, future policies, or it can communicate basically assessment of current economic situation. So did you include everything, or you try to categorize some things?
So here we're looking at, like, so we are not really using the topic only to differentiate, for instance, the full guidance, or try to look at the private assessment of the economy. One can do it with topic models or with some classification of document or species, what it is about. But we're not doing that yet. But here we're mostly thinking, it's mostly like private assessment of the economy. You're thinking about central bank, you're seeing on some information which is not publicly available. For instance, you might get some statistics earlier than the public figures, or you get the statistics before publication of statistics, or they have some information, for instance, the healthiness of the banking system, like stress testing. You might have information, detailed information about that, and you can use the speeches to convey this information slowly and try to coordinate the market expectations, because we don't want the volatility to be too high in the financial market. So that's the channel we have in mind. But we can definitely do more to test which one is more important. But our hunch for now is that private assessment is sort of important, which is traction here.
Sorry, maybe one more comment.
Yes.
So, I'm just curious about exactly what you're trying to find, like in the very end. I can give you my opinion, I might be wrong, you might criticize my opinion. So in my view, you kind of look more for correlation between, central bank communication and spillovers and outcomes. And it can be completely, fair exercise to do or fair, research to do. So what I think is more interesting, maybe I'm wrong, is to look how shocks to communication, even everything else constant, would actually affect things. would be probably more interesting, but much more harder to do at the same time. So right now, if you have that, there is some shock to sentiment, and this shock to sentiment probably very correlated with first forecasts of future economic situation. So, for example, we think that everything, it seems that world economy is, accelerating, blah, 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 so we just state that everything is going to be fine, and then it turns out that everything is fine, so which is kind of obvious, yes? The other thing is that we think that the economic situation is going to be better in the future, and then our actions, our conventional monetary policy, our action on interest rates, continues our beliefs about the future. So this is also, so we have these correlations, which it's hard to see what is the effect of communication in isolation of all other factors. And I agree that it's probably impossible to do it all unless you can do some crazy experiments with the world economy. Yeah, I don't know how to do it better, but this is my impression, and maybe we can comment on it.
Yeah, it's also become very difficult once you want to go beyond one country or go into international dimension. Because all the study using, like looking at communication effect, looking at domestic effect. There you can do sort of factor augmented VAR, so like putting many variables, including maybe private assessment, like forecasters, like SPF. You can sort of get out their sort of surprise component on their sort of their forecasting. But for the moment, given we are interested in international dimensions, it seems like very hard to include more variables than we currently do. But one thing we try to do a little bit is in the normal regression, try to put in more variables. But then once we try to also put in more variables, like we said, forecasters, and the sample decrease quickly, then the result will be driven by maybe 2 or 3 countries, and it's not really interesting. I think it's like a common issue in the international economic. If you're doing empirical work on that, then you're sort of restricted on the set of countries to look at and the set of variables to make. So yeah, it's a challenge. So it's like you have to think about whether you want to include more countries or you want to do more variables. So at least here we are saying, maybe the geographic distance that we show in the end is only a simple, like a phenomenon of other indicators. Could be like where we missed. But I'm well completely open to this suggestion. But for the moment, we couldn't find any variables take away strong explanatory power. Because in the beginning, we think that maybe the geographic distance is a symbol for the importance of trade, but it's not there. If we put in the trade mix, it's not. So you have to think about something which is sort of correlated with the geographic distance, and then have impact on communication. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this comprehensive study and very interesting results. I'm just wondering, is this methodology of constructing the sentiment index is applicable to emerging markets, to small economies in general? Because, okay, I understand that if you talk about large economies like US or Eurozone, definitely this upside sentiment works, yeah. So they will have, because when you have boosting economic activity, inflation, upside risk, yes, so they correlate their correlation, so they have those correlation, everything works well. But for example, in emerging markets, exchange rate behavior is very important. Yeah, and during the bull cycle, for example, you may have depreciation of the exchange rate, and at the same time, because of that, due to the exchange rate change, so inflation may go down. Yeah, and in that case, it seems for me that this complicates a little bit the construction of such sentiment index, for example, because in our case, find the same words and some positive words working in one direction.
Yeah, so, I mean, so far, even though we are trying to cover as many countries as we can, we do have a more emphasis on developed countries. That's true. So for small economy, for emerging markets, one problem we encountered is the limited number of speeches given by the emerging countries. I guess we just talked about before the talk, like the National Bank of Ukraine is trying to encourage more transparency and publication of speeches and communicate more to the public. We think it's well, research is great, so we can look at the impact also in the emerging countries that could have these special cases. But on the other hand, also we have to acknowledge the difficulty here because like different emerging countries may have a different emphasis in terms of policy. Like we said, here emphasize a lot of exchange rate, and then we are not looking at these special cases one by one. So we are mostly looking at the general picture. I think global case, maybe this is will be fine. But in future, I think one can imagine if the emerging markets are doing more communication to the public, and then perhaps there will be some lessons to be learned. How does the communication on particular policy can have an impact right away without the actual policy actions might able to calm down markets. So one thing I'm thinking about is this example we use in the paper, and also I guess we know, it's about the financial crisis, the crisis management. It's in the developed countries, but it's in during the European social crisis, Draghi had this famous speech with every text. Without any actual policy implementation, markets sort of calm down after the speech. So this is only, of course, anecdotal, but it's sort of, I think it's a nice example showing the power of words. Because sometimes the volatility is really driven by the uncertainty of policy. So, and also by the uncertainty of the underlying fundamental economy. I can imagine in the emerging markets, if the central bank are better communicating and coordinating the needs of the market participants, it can also reduce the uncertainty dramatically. This will be helpful for the transmission of policy, and also for the policy going forward, for the implementation will be easier. But it's definitely interesting, and could be an interesting research direction going forward.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for the presentation. I'm wondering, when you have this sentiment index and then you aggregate it to on the quarterly basis, do you think it's still measured communication, or it's more about, I don't know, so the central bank, what he communicates, it doesn't mean that it's like, it connects to the reality, you know? So maybe when you aggregate it to quarterly basis, this index, as I see, becomes more something like expectations of the central bank about the current situation or about the future. Is it about, and then when you talk about spillovers, is it about communication, or it's more about I don't know, expectations or something like that? I don't see the connection very clear.
Yeah. So. Like some of your questions from the audience already pointed out this direction. So we do look at quarterly frequency, and as I said, we want to capture the low frequency movements. Either you call it expectations or sentiment, or something like something different. We don't want to take a stance here, but we just want to say the way we think about the channels is it's assessment of underlying economy. So it can be expectations, but it's more like central bank trying to release their beliefs into the market. So it's like central bank is, again, coming from the more extreme framework, the central bank is sort of playing an important role in coordinate the participants in the market. So can be trying to make sure the participants in the market sort of have underlying expectations of the central bank. That's totally fine. Yeah. But it's
Let me clarify what I
maybe
mean.
very wide.
Let's take an example of Brexit. Yeah, so this is kind of some shock. This is not a communication shock. This is nothing. So it happens in Britain, and people start to talk about it. Yeah, so they first started talking in Britain, then they started talking in Europe, yeah, for example. So this shock, like you can call it, and you will call it communication shock because you will measure it through the sentiment index. But in particular, it's not communication shock. It's more about other economic shocks that occur in the economy, but you measure it by the sentiment index.
Sure. So it means like essentially you want to include many variables to do all these. Yeah. So here we're taking like a very simple measure which we think captures sentiments or the whatever you call it, optimism of the central bank. But we cannot tease out whether it's really it cannot be like purely sentiment, right? It has to be something we see. If you believe there is a strong impact in the economy. So it can be something happen with the economy, and then central bank first will think about it and talk about it. Then you see the other central banks pick up on this. That's also possible, but we cannot rule out this possibility. We'll just say this measure is so easy to compute and capture. It's like a gross capturing of the general sentiment or general positivity regarding the views. Yeah. And also we can only condition on variables we include in VRs to address this. But I guess you can bring in certain variables saying maybe you should look at that in the VRs. You can do it. But for the moment, that's the relevant variable we have in mind if you look at the mandate of central bank, what they should care about. That's what we include in domestic VRs. So, yeah, we're trying to do the best, but we cannot say we did 100% to have a final conclusion. But we try our best. Yep.
I'd like to ask, why didn't you do the frequency analysis? Maybe not for the sentiment spillovers, but say how UK sentiment affects Swedish or Japanese stock markets, or the other way around.
So one can do it, but then again, you narrow yourself to a certain number of countries. And then, of course, we are now doing now, we shouldn't do it in the future, but also there are studies showing this. So there's a recent paper by Andrea Xin and Anna Sisbach. They look at sort of like in a few large countries, high frequency movements, and they look at asset prices, how they react to this non-monetary inflation, as we call non-monetary news carried in their communication. So there are papers showing this, and there's already some evidence going this direction. But we are more thinking about for the macro variable or for the real variable side, whether there is some impact. So we are taking a different approach. Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Zhang, for the great presentation. I hope that questions and comments received during the seminar will be useful for you and it will help you to clarify some vague points. And I wish you luck with publishing these results in the near future and I hope in top journal. So thank you for the great presentation.
It's really helpful. Thank you.